What if I told you that the Bible not only supports wealth building through trading, but actually commands it? I know that might sound controversial, especially if you've been raised in circles where money is treated as somehow unspiritual. But here's what most Christians don't understand about biblical stewardship and why the stock market might actually be one of the most godly places you can multiply your resources. Let me start with a story that changed everything for me. I was sitting in a church service a few years ago, and the pastor was preaching about contentment and the dangers of wealth. The message was well-intentioned, but something felt off. He quoted Jesus saying, "It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven." The congregation nodded along, but I noticed something interesting. This same church had just completed a multi-million-dollar building campaign. They were actively seeking wealthy donors to fund their missions work. They wanted people to be generous with resources they weren't supposed to have. That's when I realized there's a fundamental misunderstanding in modern Christianity about wealth, stewardship, and our responsibility to multiply what God has given us. The Bible doesn't condemn wealth. It condemns the love of money as an idol, which is completely different. In fact, when you actually study what Jesus and the apostles taught about money, you discover something revolutionary. God expects us to be strategic, wise, and yes, profitable with our resources. Consider the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. This isn't just a nice story about using your gifts. It's a direct instruction about financial stewardship. Jesus tells us about a master who gives his servants different amounts of money to manage while he's away. 2 servants double their master's investment. One buries his money in the ground, returning only the original amount. The master's response is telling. He doesn't praise the servant who played it safe. He calls him wicked and lazy. He takes away even what he had and gives it to the servant who had multiplied his investment most effectively. This parable destroys the modern Christian narrative that says we should be satisfied with just enough. Jesus is teaching us that God expects multiplication, not preservation. He expects growth, not stagnation. He expects us to take calculated risks with wisdom, not bury our resources in the ground out of fear. But here's where it gets really interesting. The master in this parable doesn't just want any kind of return, he wants profitable returns. The servant who doubled 5 talents received the same praise as the one who doubled 2 talents. The measurement wasn't the absolute amount, but the percentage return. God cares about your ability to multiply resources efficiently, regardless of how much you start with. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Many Christians have been taught that trading is gambling, and gambling is sin. But is that actually true? Let's examine what the Bible really says about this. The Bible does warn against gambling in the sense of games of chance, get-rich-quick schemes, and putting your hope in luck rather than wisdom. Proverbs 28:20 tells us that whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. But notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say being rich is wrong. It says hastening to be rich through shortcuts is dangerous. There's a massive difference between gambling and strategic investing. Gambling relies on chance. Biblical stewardship relies on wisdom. Gambling is emotional. Biblical stewardship is calculated. Gambling seeks to get something for nothing. Biblical stewardship seeks to multiply resources through understanding and skill. When you approach the stock market with proper education, risk management, and strategic thinking, you're not gambling. You're being a faithful steward of God's resources. Think about it this way. If you own a business, you're taking calculated risks with capital to generate profit. No one calls that gambling. If you invest in real estate, you're using leverage and market knowledge to multiply your investment. No one calls that gambling. But somehow, when you use the same principles of research, analysis, and strategic thinking in the stock market, people call it gambling. That's not biblical thinking. That's fear-based thinking. The Bible is full of examples of God's people being involved in commerce and trade. Abraham was extremely wealthy and used his resources strategically. Solomon built his wealth through international trade. The book of Proverbs is full of business wisdom. Jesus himself used business and investment terminology in his parables because his audience understood these principles. The early church was funded by successful business people who used their profits to advance the kingdom. Here's what I believe the Bible actually teaches about wealth and trading. God gives us resources, talents, and opportunities. He expects us to multiply them wisely. He expects us to use the profits for his purposes. The issue isn't whether we should build wealth. The issue is what we do with it once we have it. This brings us to the concept of kingdom stewardship. When you learn to trade profitably, you're not just building personal wealth. You're building the capacity for greater kingdom impact. Every dollar you multiply through wise trading is a dollar that can be used for missions, charity, supporting your family, or advancing God's purposes in the world. I've seen this principle play out in my own life and in the lives of people I work with. When you have financial freedom, you have the freedom to say yes to God's calling without worrying about paying the bills. When you have passive income from trading, you can support missionaries, fund ministry projects, or even become a missionary yourself without depending on others for support. But here's the key distinction that many Christians miss. The Bible doesn't just encourage wealth building, it encourages wise wealth building. Proverbs 27:23 tells us to know well the condition of our flocks and to pay attention to our herds. In modern terms, this means understanding your investments, knowing your risk tolerance, and managing your portfolio with wisdom. This is why I'm passionate about teaching biblical principles of trading. It's not about getting rich quick. It's about developing the skills and knowledge to multiply resources consistently over time. It's about understanding market cycles, managing risk, and building sustainable wealth that can serve kingdom purposes for decades. The difference between biblical trading and worldly trading is found in the motivation and the application. Worldly trading is motivated by greed and self-indulgence. Biblical trading is motivated by stewardship and kingdom impact. Worldly trading hoards wealth for personal pleasure. Biblical trading multiplies wealth for greater generosity and service. When you approach trading with biblical principles, you're not just learning technical analysis and market strategy. You're learning patience, discipline, wisdom, and faith. You're learning to trust God with outcomes while being faithful with the process. You're learning to see money as a tool for righteousness rather than an end in itself. Let me address some common objections I hear from well-meaning Christians. Some people say that Jesus drove the money changers out of the temple, so he must be against financial transactions. But Jesus wasn't condemning commerce. He was condemning the corruption of sacred space and the exploitation of worshipers. The money changers were cheating people who came to worship. That's completely different from honest trading in the marketplace. Others point to verses about the love of money being the root of all evil. But notice it doesn't say money is evil. It says the love of money is evil. Money is neutral. It's a tool. It can be used for good or evil depending on the heart of the person using it. When your heart is aligned with God's purposes, money becomes a powerful tool for advancing His kingdom. Some Christians worry that focusing on wealth building will distract them from spiritual matters. But I've found the opposite to be true. When you're struggling financially, you're constantly worried about money. When you have financial peace through wise stewardship, you're free to focus on spiritual growth and kingdom work without the distraction of financial stress. The reality is that God wants to bless His people with abundance so they can be a blessing to others. He wants us to prosper so we can fund His work in the world. He wants us to be wise with resources so we can model good stewardship for others. He wants us to understand how money works so we can teach others and break cycles of poverty and financial ignorance. When you study the Bible carefully, you discover that God is not opposed to wealth. He's opposed to the misuse of wealth. He's not opposed to profit. He's opposed to profiting through dishonesty or exploitation. He's not opposed to financial success. He's opposed to making financial success your God. This is why I believe every Christian should understand how to trade and invest wisely. It's not about becoming wealthy for its own sake. It's about becoming a better steward of the resources God has entrusted to you. It's about positioning yourself to be more generous, more impactful, and more effective in advancing God's purposes. The skills you learn in trading, risk management, market analysis, and strategic thinking are the same skills that make you effective in business, ministry, and life. The discipline required to be a profitable trader is the same discipline required to be a faithful Christian. The patience required to wait for the right opportunities in the market is the same patience required to wait on God's timing in your spiritual life. I've witnessed countless Christians break free from financial limitations through biblical trading principles. They've been able to support their families better, give more generously, and pursue their calling without the constraint of financial worry. They've been able to fund mission trips, support church plants, and invest in kingdom projects because they learned to multiply their resources wisely. The question isn't whether Christians should be involved in trading and wealth building. The question is whether we're going to do it with biblical wisdom or worldly foolishness. The market is going to exist whether we participate or not. Companies are going to grow and create wealth whether we invest or not. The question is whether we're going to be faithful stewards who multiply our resources for kingdom purposes or whether we're going to bury our talents in the ground out of fear. If you've been struggling with the question of whether trading aligns with your faith, I encourage you to study the scriptures for yourself. Don't just accept what you've been taught about money and stewardship. Examine what the Bible actually says about multiplication, wisdom, and faithful stewardship. You might be surprised by what you discover. The Bible calls us to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. In the context of trading, this means being shrewd and strategic in your approach while maintaining integrity in your methods. It means understanding markets and using that knowledge to multiply resources for righteous purposes. Remember, The goal isn't just to make money. The goal is to become the kind of person who can handle money wisely and use it for God's purposes. Trading teaches you discipline, patience, analytical thinking, and emotional control. These are all biblical virtues that make you a better steward in every area of life. If you're ready to explore how biblical principles can transform your approach to trading and financial stewardship, I'd love to connect with you in our Discord community where we discuss the intersection of faith, trading, and lifestyle freedom. You can also book a coaching session if you want personalized guidance on building wealth through biblical trading principles.